This is how I snuck a $300 pile of parts into a car show in just 10 days. I've already begun the transformation with over $5,000 in mods, but we're just getting started. Brake check failed and your insurance was having none of it?
Dinan, sit down!
Let's fix 5K's worth of damage for under 500 bucks. I'm starting with a color matched rear end from the part out, so I'm assessing the damage to figure where I need to cut and what needs to be bent back into shape. The main issue is the crumple zones moving the bumper mount slightly forward. So I'm coming up with the ingenious idea to turn a 4,000 pound winch, the bumper brackets, and my Z into a frame machine. Although I switched to the German tank because tank. With some tension and a BFH, I'm ready to start chopping. Hey, we hit 100K on YouTube. But after marking my lines with a paint pen, it's time to full send my first time using a cutoff wheel. I'm happy to report the HOA did not kick me out of the neighborhood for the sparks and noise. The balance finally pops out, and maybe I should keep it like this. But we made it this far, so I'm refining the new piece to match up with the opening as best I can. The visible joins are looking great, but I'm worried some gaps are too large to be welded. The next day, my homie Aaron comes through and works his absolute magic on my mediocre cutting skills. After perfecting the fitment with some tacks, he's making this way stronger than it was from factory. We spent extra time getting the visible joins on the corners perfect. So the internet isn't happy with the hack job BBL I gave my crashed BMW, so I'm gonna finish what I started either way. I'm grinding down the welds and hitting them with a wire wheel so I can mix up some metal reinforced body filler. This stuff is really strong and will help fill any gaps between the welds. But once everything's dry, I'm sanding up to 400 grit and making sure that the only visible parts of this repair, the corner seams, look just as smooth as they did from the factory. Now most hack jobs would end here, but I'm doubling down by masking off the whole area, applying seam sealer, and brushing it down to match the factory seam right above it. But while that's drying, I'm masking off the entire car with this overpriced but effective plastic sheeting so I can tack rag my repair and hit everything with a few coats of high build primer. Any little imperfections visible in your primer will show up in your final product, so I'm filling those with spot putty before sanding my base coat blend area with 800 grit and feathering that out into the clear coat with 1500. The paint shop told me blending with rattle cans would be impossible, but I'm stubborn and want to do everything myself, so here we are trying anyways. I'm using a feather into the stock paint, and after the final coat, I'm using the spot blender to melt the new and old paint together for a seamless transition. Day 10 of putting a $5,000 car in a $300 pile of parts. Angel eyes may be overplayed, but these will change your mind. I'm removing a new depot headlight so I can pop off the metal clips to access the lens. But as I was loosening the plastic clips on the side, this happened. They were halfway there. Half of the clips are already metal, but it is what it is. It is what it is. So I'm removing the tabs holding the lens in place so I can double-sided tape the angel light to the front of the lens, making sure it's in the right orientation. But of course, the eBay part is too thick to fit snugly in the housing. Thankfully, with some longer screws, I'm still able to hold the lens in place. So I'm finishing the high beam, routing the ballast wires, and sealing everything back up. I'm tapping both lights into my city light wiring so I can control them with my headlight switch. I'm quick splicing a new lead to the brown ground wire so I can butt connect it to the two black angel eye grounds. I'm doing the same thing with the gray wire and the two red positives, but now it's time to test our work. Wow, I'm blown away by how good these look. I think I can forgive a few fitment issues. So I'm splicing the gray onto the gray parking light wire, cleaning everything up, and I'm pretty happy I went with these DTM style lights. Let me know what you think. It's day 11. There are two gaping problems with their epic Turn of Motorsport splitter, but I'm filling them with these GT corners, but they don't fit my custom setup, so I have to chop them up. So let's get sidetracked by some headlight switch OCD. So I'm breaking out the plastic welder, which has become really useful on this 24-year-old German car. Satisfying clicks are totally worth it. But now I'm finally moving on to the corners. I need to measure the depth so I can cut them to the right size, but calipers obviously aren't working. So I built a custom one, measured that, and transferred everything over to the corners with tape. I'm much better, so now the front end's basically complete. Day 12, building a pile of parts. I destroyed my Turner splitter on my first drive, so I'm testing out these bumper scrape guards to prevent further damage. There's strong, flexible plastic with double-sided tape that can be cut and shaped to your bumper or lip. I'm cleaning the road out of my splitter, wiping it down with adhesion promoter, and press fitting the scrape guard in place. I want to test it up, but not before solving this catastrophic issue with this car that's driving me crazy. The hood gap on this side is about 3 millimeters wider than on the other side, so the car is basically undrivable. But I'm removing the latch to see how it works and make sure it's holding down that side of the hood properly. So it does clip in place, it just needs to be lowered. Things I do for content. So I'm adjusting the latch as low as it will go, but even then that's not enough. This is getting ridiculous. Day 13, I swapped in a whole new door, but now my key won't work and the window won't roll down. It just makes a clicking noise. So I'm stripping the old motor, regulator, harness, and handle off the old one. Gotta thank German engineering again for using rivets instead of bolts to hold this thing together. So one drill, Dremel, mallet, and chisel later, the harness and regulator pop right out. But I couldn't access the motor screws because I had the window all the way down. So I found the trick to moving your motor manually that no one's talking about, even on your car. By removing these screws, I can pop the casing off to reveal the motor's rotor. Spinning this let me move the regulator until I could access the holes I needed to remove the motor. So I'm hopping in to test which combination of new and old parts will get this thing to work. But after lowering the broken motor manually, I'm trying it one more time with the original harness, in case I don't need to drill out a second regulator and this happens. Dope? So it's fixed, right? Day 14, working on my $300 trash bag. Our roof trim is faded, rusty, flaking, and like $400 from BMW. But I've got to somehow make money on this build, so I'm fixing it for like 20 bucks. So I'm starting to mask everything off, but on the underside, there's a rubber gasket attached to the metal trim. So I might as well use our cardstock again. By cutting the cardstock and stuffing it between the trim and the rubber, I'm able to avoid any overspray. So I'm spending an hour sanding off all the rust and bad paint, so I can scuff the surface with 400, vacuum off any excess, and clean it down with some isopropyl alcohol. This SEM trim black is supposedly the best stuff out there and has primer built in, so let's see how it lays down. I'm spraying 3 coats, one parallel to the trim, one from the top edge, and one from down below. This should give me full coverage and a long-lasting finish. After letting it dry for 5 minutes, it's already looking like it's completely transformed this side of the car. But first, I've got to unmask the car and inspect the paint on our rear end repair for the first time. What do you think? Not bad for a total noob. Day 15 and I'm finally reassembling my $300 financial disaster. But before I took it apart, I found some huge issues that would drive my OCD crazy. The bumper doesn't line up with the fender, my aluminum diffuser isn't flush, my exhaust is melting through my temporary heat shield, and my stock diffuser isn't staying in place. So I'm going to swap these longer bolts out with the shorter ones I should have used, and I'm learning the difference between rib nuts that are supposed to be used in thin sheet metal versus jack nuts that work better in thicker plastics like our bumper. With the old one removed, the new one goes in, but it's still not flush. So I'm using my plastic welder to melt it into the bumper. That's not going anywhere. Our exhaust isn't centered, so I'm trying to bend the tab, but it's too flexible, so hopefully some spacers will do the trick. I can't tell if the foil tape didn't work or if I just missed a spot, but with some actual effort, this black heat tape is looking clean. So with the bumper back on, I'm punching, drilling, and rib nutting a hole in the inner fender so a bolt can line everything up perfectly. Day 16, and this really is a $300 pile of parts. I'm hearing my M3 trim flapping in the wind, but I found out the biggest mistake people make when installing. This front grommet condom thing only works for the base trim, and apparently the right plastic clips were hidden in the box I ordered over a year ago. So after snapping the trim into place properly, it shouldn't fall off again, right? Now I'd like to install the holy grail of strut bars I got from Turner Motorsport, but now my hood literally won't open for some reason. So I enlist my dad for some help, we get it popped, and I'm installing this functional automotive jewelry that probably doubles the value of this car. My guess is the hood latches were just dirty and binding, so I cleaned them out and hit them with some lube. But now I can install these rear bushing shims before my alignment. We'll see if they actually reduce display, which is making my handling pretty sloppy. I'm marking and removing the bolts holding the bracket to the chassis and the bushing so I can install the shims and torque everything back to spec. The other side of the car took me less than 20 minutes to knock out. So I'm about to go for a test drive, but one of my brand new headlights has already failed. I'm swapping the bulbs to the other side to check the wiring, and apparently these things are absolute garbage. 2 quality bulbs later, I know these will last, but they look the same as the crappy ones. So someone please point me in the direction of a quality LED retrofit. Day 17, and this 90s luxury coupe has way too much body roll even with the stiffer suspension. So I'm improving our handling and feel even more with some upgraded adjustable sway bars. Most of the mods we've done to this car, from our feel coilovers to our strut bars to our bushings, are being held back by these stock sways. So I'm unbolting the bracket holding the front to the frame rails and the end link to the control arms. Just like that, the front bar falls out and we can ask our shop dog, this one or this one? I think she's a McLaren fan. Our new bar is 2 millimeters thicker, has 3 adjustable settings, and comes with stiffer poly bushings and end links. I'm cleaning the bracket and lubing the bushings, and everything goes back in pretty easily. But the rear bar is a completely different story. But thankfully, everything's going back in way smoother than it came out. The car's already handling a lot better, but can a noob swap a transmission as fast as a real mechanic? It's day 18 and I have no idea, but we're about to find out. The old one whines like a Karen who's been cleared for takeoff, and third gear has left the chat for good and is trying to take fourth with it. If I can beat 5 hours, I'm installing my dream short shifter from Cooler Works. But if I fail, I have to keep this cheap knockoff that comes standard with 6 neutrals. 12 minutes in and I've already jacked up the car and disconnected the battery. I'm ratchet strapping the engine to the strut bar so it doesn't tilt when the transmission comes off. But now I can remove the exhaust, heat shield, drive shaft, and basically gut the underside of the car. Remember, safety buckets are an important part of everyone's toolbox. The drive shaft is annoying me because I have to brace it to loosen the bolts, then rotate it again to access the rest of them. I should be dropping the trans now, but I'm so confident I'm ripping this garbage shifter out and introducing it to its new stepdad. But that's where I'm realizing I'm running a little low on time. So I'm ripping out the cross member, the slave cylinder, and the bell housing bolts. But then, disaster strikes. No amount of prying, begging, or swearing will dislodge this transmission from the back of the block. And my zero slop shifting, self-centering Cooler Works shifter dreams are sliding down the drain. But I'm in too deep to stop now, so I use a ratchet strap to pull the trans back while I pry, and it finally pops right off. It turns out the input shaft was rusted onto the clutch. 639, apparently wrong that. But now I can prep the new trans by cleaning it, swapping over the shift linkage, and filling it with automatic trans fluid. This one's sliding back onto the engine like butter. But then I remember I'm not even sure it works because I found it in the trunk when I bought the car. So all I can do is reinstall everything reverse, have a spiritual experience when I learn the car still starts, and shift my car into third gear for the first time since I bought it. With my new shifter, of course. He really thought. Day 19 and the holy grail of carbon fiber performance just showed up from Turner Motorsport. This cold air intake should kick our decent stock airbox to the next level. 5 minutes later and that would be the easiest install of your life, is what I would say. But there's a huge self-inflicted problem. This part's designed to take full advantage of all the space behind the US spec headlights. But I swapped to the larger Euro spec because they're glass projectors. So I'm ripping out the stock airbox to see if I can make this fit. I'm pulling the headlight to check the cool air pocket where the filter will sit, but naturally there's a horn in the way. If you're a purist, look away now because the Dremel's coming out along with this bracket and there's no turning back. I'm hitting the cut line with some touch-up paint and relocating the horn to the fog light bracket. The kit comes with this perfectly fitted heat shield mount, but I'm special so it's going right back in the box. But the MAF housing bracket works perfectly and should be all we need. Time to see how tight this really is. It's close, but this headlight adjuster sticks out way too far. But our tapered backup filter is too tall and we'd have to chop up the brake duct to make it fit. So the adjuster's gotta go, but it still works. And the filter's held perfectly in place by the fender and the headlight. After a quick check for vacuum leaks, it's time for a test drive. And with that, we can finally wash the car for the first time in almost 2 years of ownership. If you made it this far in the video, you're literally the GOAT. I'll be reposting the funniest comments that make people think they missed something crazy at the end of the video on my IG story. But with the car clean, we were finally ready for a 1,000-mile road trip. I don't want to leave you guys hanging, so what engine should we swap into this thing?